Before we begin, I want to give a little special thanks and shout out to Eric R., also known as Sassy Squatch, for providing this lovely bit of cringe for me to read. Now, you may be wondering, what is a spooky noodle? Well, my friends, it is a scary story that tries to be scary, but does not quite make the mark. But it's actually pretty funny to read. That being said, let us begin. The rain beat a steady rhythm on the asphalt. In the dark sky above, the rumble of distant thunder rolled slowly towards us. Daniel! The sound of my name pulled me from my reverie. I turned my head away from the drenched playground and towards Miss Watson. Are you with us? She asked, resting a hand on the edge of my desk. I nodded unconsciously, my mind a million miles away. I looked to the watch on her left wrist. It was a beautiful timepiece, a circular face surrounded by a gold bezel with a wide two-tone bracelet. Fine golden hands pointed to the time. Just a little before 4 p.m. It would be another half hour before I would be able to escape. Daniel, she chided again. Yes? I answered quickly, looking up at her. Yes, I repeated somewhat sheepishly. The corner of Miss Watson's mouth turned upward in a slight smile as she moved backward toward her desk. My sole companion sitting at the desk next to mine waved a finger, mimicking a scolding. I ignored her as my eyes drifted back outside. Dark, dreary, and wet. It was the perfect metaphor for Friday afternoon detention. I tried to force my attention back towards the math textbook, but I found myself unable to concentrate. Miss Watson! Emma, my detention buddy, wheedled. Can I go yet? Unwilling to try and force myself through the next math problem, I focused on Miss Watson instead. I had assumed she was somewhere around 40, judging by the laughter lines tugging at the corner of her eyes and the faint wrinkles on her brow. She was an attractive woman, tall and fit, with her dark brown hair cut short. Her jaw was pronounced, giving her the look of a fighter. Well, she had always been kind and patient with me. She could be fearful when angry. She tapped the face of her watch in response to Emma's question. Mr. Dawes made it clear to me you were to remain in detention until 4. It's nearly 4 now. And when it's exactly 4, you may go. Miss Watson looked to me, and I flushed as my gaze lingered too long on her. I looked down on my textbook as she approached. How are you finding these? She asked quietly. Fine. I lied. I was a smart kid, but always struggled with numbers. I had flunked the previous night's homework so badly that Miss Watson had placed me in detention so I could catch up. I watched as she traced a finger down my work so far. Good, she said, but slow. I'm expecting you to have this complete before... Emma's scream pierced the classroom. Both Miss Watson and I jumped as one. Emma Delaney! Miss Watson shouted, quickly regaining her composure. What do you think you're doing? Emma raised a shaky hand but said nothing. I watched as my teacher's expression softened. Emma, what is it? I looked out to the darkening playground, expecting to see someone staring through the window, but there was no one there. Emma? Miss Watson placed a hand on her pupil's shoulder. I saw Henry, Emma squeaked. I felt myself swallow hard. Oh, for the love of... Some of Miss Watson's fire returned. Emma, I will not have you disrupt Daniel with some childish story. I saw him, Emma repeated. Wandering eyes looked up at Miss Watson. It crawled under the cabinet. Doubt flashed across Miss Watson's features for a brief second. She looked at her watch and then back to Emma with a heavy sigh. You may go, she said after a few seconds of deliberation. Emma did not need a second invitation. She did not bother packing her bag. She simply grabbed it, her books, and bolted for the door. I listened to the fading footsteps as Emma raced down the tiled corridor. Henry? Miss Watson laughed softly as she sat on Emma's now empty desk. Not a bad way to buy yourself a couple minutes out of detention, I suppose. I heard other people say they seen him too, I offered. Everyone had heard the stories. Miss Watson's smile was kind. I've been teaching here for close to 20 years now, Daniel. The Henry story has been going well before I started. Don't let Emma's acting spook you. I would never have thought Emma to be clever enough to think of pulling such a stunt, or talent enough to be so convincing. She seemed pretty sure, I offered quietly, trying to ignore the small flash of shame. At 15, I was too old to get spooked by ghost stories. You don't believe her, do you? Miss Watson's tone suggested patience, tinged with a hint of disappointment as she expected more from me. Before I could deny anything, Miss Watson had stood up and moved back toward the front of the class. I watched as she fetched a long ruler from the holder beside the whiteboard. Cabinet, was it? I nodded weakly. Okay, I'll chase our friend Henry, and then you can get back to your work, she said, pointing with the ruler and favoring me with a friendly wink. I nodded again as she knelt by the cabinet. Henry! Miss Watson poked hard with the ruler. Henry? I felt myself go uneasy. I wanted to say that my teacher had proven her point, that I was being silly, and I should get back to work. Miss Watson? I said meekly. She turned to look at me. Miss Watson, The words died in my mouth with a whimper. A hand crept out from underneath the cabinet, a pale white hand and nothing more. It was frozen in place as I scuttled forward towards Miss Watson. Distracted by me, she did not see it as it crept toward her. The hand brushed her own. I could see the surprise register on her face before she looked slowly down. There was no screaming. Miss Watson simply gasped as the ruler dropped from her hand. She followed it down, slumping to the ground at the foot of the cabinet. Miss Watson! She didn't move. Her eyes were closed tight. Slowly, I raised myself from my seat, trying to ignore the bile that began to rise in my throat. Miss Watson? I tried again, more feebly than before. Slowly, Henry crawled up Miss Watson's left arm and onto her back. His pale form stood out starkly against the dark gray of her sweater. I watched as he started moving towards her neck. Some unknown instinct kicked at me then, a belief which suggested he meant my teacher harm. I was too afraid to move toward them. My mind screamed that I should, but my legs would not respond. Instead, I lifted and heaved my textbook towards them. It sailed embarrassingly wide, landing with a heavy thud on the wall behind where Miss Watson lay. Henry turned to look at the sound and scuttled back towards the cover of the cabinet. I ran to Miss Watson's prone form. Miss Watson! Miss Watson! It was no good. She fainted dead away, her body limp as I shook her. From the shadows of the cabinet, I could feel Henry watching me as I picked my teacher up and dragged her to the door. So, my dears, how was that? Hope you weren't too scared. Or die from hyper-giggling. Anyway, if you find any more cringe stories, be it horrors of fan fiction or any kind of spooky noodle, please send it to me. I'll be happy to narrate it next week. Bye for now.